So back to the history of books real quickly. So books are really just a medium and a format of stories we write in the modern day, right? And currently, in my opinion, I've seen them fallen slightly out of favor. Not necessarily in publishing or in sales or whatnot, but I'll get into that a little later. But throughout history, this type of book or story format, as we call it, has definitely seen many different forms. So going back to ancient history, some of the most popular books that have survived is going to be religious texts, like the Quran from the Middle East and the Islamic world. On screen are also the Bible, the King James versions, which is one of the most widespread ones with containing both the Old and New Testament. Even more of the religious texts that are also widely distributed would also be Buddhist scriptures and teachings, and a lot of philosophical and educational writing on the topic. But I really want to explore the mediums and the ways books have transitioned, and the way that they have gone through that process is just very fascinating, and I would like to take everyone through that. So those are some of the more famous examples. I'll go into some of the more older ones I know, and some of the lesser known ones I thought that you guys might enjoy. We're now going to be going into a brief history of books from the time period of between 2500 BC or BCE and 1500 AD. So I know the scientific terms behind it, which is BC stands for before Common Era, or if I'm not mistaken, before Christ. And AD stands for after death, or the Latin term for AD is Anno Domini, or birth of Jesus Christ. I always thought it was after death. Also referred to as CE or just Common Era. Those are just the rough time periods. Just a quick disclaimer, the way when we're presenting these, as with most things, are generally not going to be in chronological order, but I do display rough dates pulled from questionable sources, or at least academically questionable sources like Wikipedia. But in my opinion, I feel that they're quite solid and credible. Okay, so first off, we are going to Asia. Around 1200 BCE, specifically China, that region. China is one of the supposedly oldest civilizations in the world. It's definitely the oldest surviving, one of the oldest surviving civilizations in the world. There's a couple contenders for that title, but I think we definitely agree that China is quite old, and they claim to be around 5,000 years old. Regardless, they go quite far back. I know some of the oldest recorded ones would be the Shang dynasty. A lot of the Shang bronzes are still preserved and seen today. And they definitely that country contains some of the oldest artifacts in the world. Aside from some of the even more prehistoric ones like Neanderthal and caveman paintings like the Lascaux caves. But aside from that, they have some of the oldest ones in the world. And some of the first writings of their recorded history would be preserved on ancient oracle bones, turtle shells, and a lot of bronze cauldrons by emperors. I'll go into bronze cauldrons in a little bit, but supposedly how it worked is that they'd throw bones into a fire and watch how the cracks spread, and they just try and read that, and they'd inscribe stuff on that to they believe that's like how the ancestors communicated with them. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's what I remember. But on the topic of bronze cauldrons, right, the reason why that's significant in history is that a lot of emperors would write historic laws, edicts, and the things they did, like deeds, on these bronze cauldrons just to record for future generations, because, bronze, like most metals, persist over time. And historically, in more modern history, this is like even the 1600s, like even ancient, probably a couple centuries ago, historians would take rubbings of these. So although the cauldron might have not have been preserved, right, they preserved it onto paper so that they could keep it in storage, so that even if they didn't have the cauldron, or if they sold it to someone else or turned it into scrap metal, which would be atrocious, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. they would preserve the writings that it came from. And it was also one of the easiest ways to get a copy of the inscriptions without actually having to cast a replica of it or anything, or write it down by hand. And on the left, you can see some of the styles of Chinese writing. It's a pictograph. Chinese writing is really a pictograph, or they're known as Chinese characters. And the way that the style develops allows for an interesting way to date historical artifacts of writing. And those are some of the first writings and recorded history in books in Asia. Now moving on to more of the fertile river crescent, or the river delta. Near Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, that region, the Arabic Peninsula, which is one of the cradles of civilization, which is how it's known in world history. We get, what you're looking at is going to be a Sumerian cuneiform tablet. This photo is courtesy of LACMA, the Los Angeles Contemporary Museum of Art, which is public domain. And a quick note on public domain. I enjoy crediting organizations, institutions, and individuals who put their works in public domain because they make it available for everyone. And I also try to ensure that Creative Commons publishers also get their work credited. Although I generally sometimes have some difficulties in trying to figure out the difference between Creative Commons 3 and Creative Commons 4, 2, 1, and even 0. So the reason why I credit public domain authors is because I'm just more familiar with it, to be honest with you. So apologies to Creative Commons people, because I know you guys are quite generous instead of putting it behind a paywall or something. With that out of the way, around 1840 BCE, this is where you get the cuneiform tablet. I can get into a little bit of the writing system thanks to a video by Extra Credit History on the Extra Credits History channel on writing. The way they write is that they write the symbols or notches or whatever or tallies on the tablet, and then they supposedly rotate it sideways to read it, so it's a little bit confusing. They have an advanced writing system, but these writings contain a lot of tallies and markings, some very simplistic, and I think they're considered pictographs as well, because that's some of the oldest ways to record stuff. And most of it just recorded basic stuff like taxes, grain collection, and other really mundane data that they'd want to put on tablets to record. And some of those are preserved to this day, and which can be seen in various museums. And to the right is a supposed alphabet. Those types of things are going to be coming from questionable sources, as I mentioned before, like Wikipedia. But I'm just trying to give people a general idea of what it looks like. Then moving on to around 1100 BCE, you get to Egyptian hieroglyphics, which is some of the more recognizable ones. To be honest, I recall Egyptian hieroglyphics being even older, though I could definitely be wrong, as there are definitely many eras of the Egyptian kingdom, the Middle Ages, and whatnot. But Egyptian hieroglyphics are some of the most recognizable and most famous around the world. They're definitely some of the most famous pictographs and styles of writings from ancient history, at least. They're even on the world-famous Rosetta Stone, which helped to really decipher the language of hieroglyphics from Greek. A lot of linguists and language historians really put a lot of work into deciphering hieroglyphics. Yeah, so I think around that time is around the middle or around the golden age of Egyptian history, Khufu and a lot of the builders and whatnot. When Upper and Lower Egypt were united. I'm not 200% sure on the history. I'm just trying to give a quick history on this. Some of the more famous Egyptian characters, just getting into it, is Thoth, which is the ibis-headed person, bird-headed guy, but he has a long beak, kind of like a crane or something. And then the short-beaked bird-headed guy, which is supposed to be a falcon, representing the god Horus. So Thoth is the god of wisdom, and I'm not 100% sure what Horus is. There's also a couple famous ones with a guy with a mason jar over his head, a couple of snakes, cats. I think even the cat-headed person is Bastet. Other characters would also be Osiris, the Eye of Ra, and the Anket. As I said, those are just some basic characters. And in the interest of time, I don't really have sources below, so take all of these things with a grain of salt. This is just a brief overview. So their pictographs, they also used pictographs for characters. They call them hieroglyphics, and the Chinese, they call their pictographs Chinese characters. And then moving on,